Welcome back to Come Heck or Hot Water, formerly known as Fahrenheit 140, the podcast focused on building resilience for water and the environment. I'm Robert Mace.
And I'm Carrie Thompson. Let's go figure this out together.
Hey, Carrie.
Hey,
How
Robert.
are you doing?
Great. Welcome to the new podcast. How you feeling about it?
I'm feeling good. We've got a new name, a slight rebrand. It's the same thing. It's you and me.
Yeah.
We're talking about some of the same topics, but let's say we realize that the issues that we're facing here in Texas really are global issues. They're national issues. So we're trying to step back and generalize things a little bit, but we're still gonna keep looking at Texas because this is where we're from.
Yeah, and it was fun to shine a light on all the good things that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
But I think these issues are complicated enough that we need to do a little more of a deep dive.
Yeah, so we're themed
Yeah.
on this season.
And I managed to get you to drop the title that referenced skin scalding, which is really nice for me.
Yeah, I like it. I would preferred HELL over HECK, but we got this is a family friendly show.
It's a hockey stick, yeah.
It's a family friendly show. So,
That's right.
But there's still a climate component with the hot water because that's certainly part of it. But ultimately, we're looking for how do we build resilience for our water resources for everybody that uses water, everything that uses water, every critter, the environment, industry, people.
And I think looking back in the last 5-10 years, there was the idea that we weren't sure how things were going to go or how quickly we were going to see changes in the climate. And I think we're acknowledging that those changes are coming and we need to start thinking about what we can do to be ready for those changes.
Yeah, I think they're here, actually. Yeah. I'm doing some research now that's it looks to me that it's here. We're seeing impacts here in Texas.
That's right.
So we're going to focus on really one of the potential solutions.
That's right. Each season, we're going to pick something that we think is going to be meaningful in the way we respond to these challenges. So kicking off this season, we're going to talk about desalination.
Desalination is of course, a big interest to Texas. We do have the Gulf.
The Gulf, fill in the blank with your favorite nomenclature.
We have the Gulf of Buc-ee's out there as a source of water. I saw a map recently that was showing all the countries in the world that have ocean access. Mm-hmm. And the vast majority, I was surprised, the vast majority of countries do. So it's a viable option for a lot of folks.
Climate change will bring the ocean right to you, too. If you don't have it yet.
Good point.
It's coming soon.
Good point. Yes. So it's certainly something that's been discussed in Texas and will continue to be discussed. Mm-hmm. There's some active work being done. And we don't have a seawater desal plant in Texas yet, but we're going to have one soon. I feel pretty confident we're going to have one soon. And there are a number of other parties looking at desal along the coast. So I think the next 10 years, we're going to see quite a bit of that happening.
Yeah. So our goal is over the next 6 episodes to really dive in and help everyone understand what we're talking about and what these solutions look like, what the pros and cons are, and, meet some of the main players. So some of the topics we've got queued up are to talk about the work that they're doing in Israel. They have a long history there of using desalination. Mm-hmm. And that's informing some of these emerging ideas that are happening here in Texas. And so we want to get a sense of kind of what the vision would be for a desalination effort, because we don't know the scale yet across the state. We want to talk about what's the impact to the ecology of our precious bays and estuaries here in Texas. And what do we do with that wastewater? Because there's a byproduct from the process that we need to be thoughtful about. And thinking about that even more about what are the other economic impacts and just the future outlook and challenges. We'll do a wrap up at the end of the season.
Cool. Well, I hope you got someone good to kick things off.
We got the hottest get. We got the biggest get for this first episode. I want to introduce our speaker, Dr. Robert Mace. As much as I don't like to say it to him, Robert is one of the most preeminent experts on water in the state of Texas and globally even. His publications across groundwater and freshwater topics. And so I've got the bullets for the bio. I know most of our listeners know Robert, but just to kind of orient the conversation, he is the executive director here at the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment. He is also our chief water policy officer and a professor of practice in the Department of Geography here at Texas State University. He has over 30 years of experience in water resources and policy and degrees in geophysics, hydrology, and hydrogeology. Triple threat. He worked at the Texas Water Development Board for 18 years. And when he left there, he was the deputy executive administrator for water science and conservation.
Yes, that's important.
Sorry about that.
It's all right.
During his time at the board, he worked on understanding groundwater and surface water resources in Texas, advancing water conservation, and innovative water technologies like desal, reuse, rainwater harvesting, regional and state water planning, and protecting Texans from floods. He's currently working on a book about water resources and climate change, and 2 years ago finished one on groundwater sustainability.
Groundwater,
right?
Yep.
So really, we really couldn't get a better speaker to help us understand the challenges we're dealing with here in Texas and all across the country and globe with fresh water, and maybe some of these ideas that are bubbling up around desal.
Cool. I must be plan C or D. Right? It's just like some other folks.
You're the
fall
cheapest
through.
for sure.
Yeah, well, this is true. Yeah. And you get what you pay for.
So before we get started, we're going to go through some identified keywords for everybody. So the first one is desalination. And desalination is the process of removing stuff dissolved in water.
And the definition I provided, I said stuff.
Yeah, I don't know about stuff.
Stuff is a good word.
This is your definition?
Yes, that's my definition.
Oh, I may want to backpedal on my bragging about you.
But if you go look, I looked up official definitions and I wasn't happy with them because they usually say removing salt from seawater, but it's like it doesn't have to be seawater.
That's the in the word, though.
True,
desal?
but generally everything is removed. So like PFAS, organics and things like that. So that's why I put stuff in there, because it isn't just salt that comes out through a desalination process, or typical desalination processes. You filter almost everything out. So.
And Robert, just real quick for the audience members, can you define what a PFAS is?
PFAS. Oh man, per and poly, fluoro, something substances.
We like to call those the baddies.
Yeah, the forever. It's the forever chemicals. Yeah. And there's thousands of them. EPA recently put some maximum contaminant levels on them. So water utilities will have to start treating for those and expect more to come.
Yeah.
And the brine concentrate. The brine concentrate is the salty waste solution that results from desalination. And then we also have brackish groundwater, water in aquifers that is not fresh.
Brackish groundwater, water in aquifers that is not fresh. But you know what? Folks may not know what fresh water means.
Yeah. And I debated about defining fresh, but I didn't put it in there, but I'm glad you asked.
Thanks.
So fresh is generally, and this is the crazy thing, there's like not standard agreed upon definitions for this stuff.
Yeah.
But generally, fresh is water that has less than 1,000 parts per million of dissolved solids in it.
Stuff.
Yeah, stuff. Which may be more than salts.
And generally, we think about fresh water being
500 or less. So there's a secondary standard that EPA has. It's not enforceable. It's more about taste. That for municipal water providers or public water suppliers is 500. But you live in West Texas, you're chewing on water that's sometimes higher than 1,000 parts per million.
Yeah.
Technically, brackish is like 1 to 3,000 or 1 to 10,000, depending how you define things. But of course, you can have salty groundwater saline or hypersaline groundwater that, it's like over 500,000 parts per million.
Wow.
Some of that produced water from the Permian Basin,
Mhm.
from oil and gas production, can be truly crunchy water.
Thanks for that.
Sure.
Thanks,
More than
Sarah.
you wanted to know.
No, good stuff. Good stuff. So, Robert, if our listeners want to know more about what this stuff in the water means, where can they submit a question to the podcast? This little pop quiz for
Pop
you.
quiz? Okay,
Yeah.
great.
All right. So I'm going to give you 4 choices.
All right.
If you have a question about this podcast, you could A, use a link at the bottom of our e-newsletter.
Okay.
B, use a link in our show notes.
Mm-hmm.
C, you could email us directly at meadowcenter@txstate.edu.
Okay.
Or D, is it all of the above?
We need a timer. I'm going to say D.
Sarah, is that right?
That's correct,
Oh,
Robert.
way to go, Robert. All that education really paid off.
It's the geophysics degree.
Well, let's get into it. In all seriousness, I'm really glad that we have your time for this because you do such a great job painting a picture of the situation we have here around water. So could you just help folks get a sense of the challenges we have when it comes to fresh water, especially in relation to the changing climate?
So for the time being, setting aside the climate, we here in Texas, the United States and many countries around the world are struggling with water supplies under the stress of increasing populations. And then on top of that, here comes these warming temperatures. And some places will probably, make out with more rainfall. It may not come the way they like it. It may come in big bursts, which is not conducive to storing or doing something with that water. Much of the world is going to struggle with less water availability. So even if the rain stays the same, even if the rain gets higher, with higher temperatures, there's more evaporation from the soils, the land surface, from reservoirs. And with more evaporation off the soils, you're getting less runoff of water from the land surface into streams, rivers, and lakes. You're getting less recharge.
So it's like a thirsty sponge just soaking up the rain and it's not
Right.
making its way into the river.
Right. And the rains are expected to be a little more focused with longer, drier spells in between. That's not conducive to filling reservoirs and refilling aquifers because the soil's drying out in between. It's like you really need a lot of rain over a longer period of time to get those filling flows for aquifers in our reservoirs. So, we are seeing that. There's evidence to suggest that the hill country is becoming drier or less runoff due to increasing temperatures. Based on some research that I'm doing these days. And then looking at what's going on to the Rio Grande in Texas. There's international water sharing issues there, but there's also just seems to be ever-present drought. And the flows that we used to get coming into that system, we no longer get. And it's not just people. It's the warming climate.
What are you hearing, seeing, thinking about our supply for human use and consumption?
So in Texas, we're expected to continue to grow from about 30 million Texans we have today to over 50 million Texans by 2070. It's a projection. It might be higher, it might be lower. That's nearly a 75% increase in population. So that's a tremendous amount of growth in a state that's already experiencing issue with water. With that increased population, we're expecting the demand for municipal users to increase from 4.6 billion gallons per day, which is what we're using today in Texas for municipal needs, growing to 7.6 billion gallons per day.
By when?
2070. So that's more than a 60% increase. That's a lot of new water the state needs to identify. So there's, we got to find a lot more water. That may be new supply sources, conservation, reuse, rainwater harvesting, or desalination.
Why do you think desalination is emerging right now, getting so much attention?
There are no other water supplies. The other water sources are either unreliable, overcommitted, or they're gone. And so we're seeing interest, for example, Corpus Christi. There's several desal projects moving down there. One big reason is that the Nueces River, for all intents and purposes, is in a new drought of record. And this was predicted by climate modeling, showing that Texas will continue to suffer from new droughts of record on a more frequent basis. And so, they're seeing record low levels in their reservoirs. So the city needs a reliable source of water. And then there's a great deal of industry down there that needs 100% reliable water. These plants, manufacturing plants, they're running at 100% or they're not running at all. There's not a big dial in there that you're like, oh, we got cut back 20% on our water supply.
Right.
Let's ramp it down. Okay, we're good. It doesn't work that way. Those plants are designed for what they're designed for. And so it's horrific for them to be looking at having to suffer an across-the-board reduction. And then that sets up political issues, right? Because if the people are being told to cut back water use 30%, and they're like, well, what about the big factory over there? That's not good politics. So some of those plants are for the city. Some of them are being built by industry down there. I'm hearing about other plants being proposed to provide industry. The other thing about industry is it's not inexpensive to desalt water, but it's a rounding error for a lot of industries. And so it's like worth the additional cost to have that certainty.
For the certainty.
Yeah. Now they'd prefer the cheaper water, but like if it's cheaper water and there's any uncertainty to that water supply, that's a problem for them. And so it's worth the investment into 100% reliable water.
Well, maybe we should spend a little time just kind of doing an overview of what is desalination or de-stuffication.
I like that. De-stuffication. Yeah.
So you want to just maybe explain some of the common ways that water is de-stuffified?
Sure. It's a fascinating history on desalination. We've probably all either wittingly or unwittingly participated in desalination through boiling water that might be considered fresh, but it's still got stuff in it. And you boil it and maybe it condenses on the side of your pot or condenses on your lid. And so that's often a way that water is de-stuffified, is through boiling. Yeah, probably the first way that people desalinate water. Back in the old seafaring days of swashbucklers and people exploring the North and South Poles, they had onboard stills to desalinate seawater to provide fresh drinking water.
So is that the distilled water is desalinated water?
It is. Yeah.
Wow. I've already learned something today.
So that's like a basic way of doing it. More commonly in the water world, what we see is reverse osmosis, RO. Some homes have RO systems to filter out the stuff. Mm-hmm. There are some groundwater desalination plants already in Texas. In fact, the first seawater desal plant in the United States was in Freeport back in the 60s when there was a program put forth by JFK, the Office of Saline Water, to investigate how to desalinate water for future water supplies. And so the first demonstration plant was built in Freeport.
Texas,
yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And there was a postcard of it. I have a postcard of the plant. And that plant shut down. It was a demonstration plant, but that technology did get employed. In fact, one of the longest running desalination plants in the world is in Del City, Texas.
Wow.
And it's continued to run since that time. And it is more of a distillation type approach that they're using, which was kind of the old school method.
Okay.
Now, reverse osmosis, it's really just a super tight filter, like so tight that it strips out all the dissolved stuff. And the only thing that passes through are the water molecules. It's not 100% perfect, but it's near perfect in terms of stripping everything out.
And my understanding is that RO uses about 50% more water than if you were just turning on the tap?
So when you use RO, you have a waste stream called Brine Concentrate. So it has higher levels of stuff, higher levels of salt. The split, how much is it, 50% or something less or something more, depends on the salinity of the water. So for seawater, it's about 50-50. So for every 100 gallons you put through your RO system, you're going to have 50 gallons of brine concentrate. That's going to be twice as salty as the sea. And you're going to have 50 gallons of permeate that is pert near completely clean, completely polished up. For brackish groundwater desal, because the salinity is a lot lower, you'll have less water going into a brine concentrate because the water's not as thick with stuff. And so it can be more efficient. Home systems can be terrible wasters of water, particularly if they're operated off the pressure of the water system. Be careful about water systems. I mean, you could have 10 gallons of water in your brine concentrate for every gallon that you produce.
Oh, gosh.
And even worse than that. So if you do RO, my recommendation is do the little, spigoty thing or something, or if there's a system you can get that self-pressures to be more efficient, because the efficiency is also related to the pressure you're applying to push the water through.
So we've got the sort of quantity factor as maybe a conservation issue related to desal. Are there other environmental issues that are related? So
there is this brine concentrate. You got to do something with it. It needs to be disposed of some way. Now, like El Paso has the K. Bailey Hutchison Brackish Groundwater Desalination plant, and it's reverse osmosis. And there's actually filters that are specifically designed for brackish groundwater, and then filters that are designed for seawater. And so they take their brine concentrate from their initial pass and run it through like seawater desal RO filters, so they can squeeze some more water out, and then they pipe it up almost to basically to the border with New Mexico and inject it up there.
No, they do not.
Yes, they do.
Oh my gosh.
It's all safe. There's been studies.
Sure there are.
They inject into something called the Fusselman. And then they've been working with some private companies that have been dabbling with harvesting that brine concentrate and squeezing more water out of it, but then harvesting the stuff, some of which is gold, but harvesting the stuff to then sell that. Which is kind of cool. So generally, like inland desalinations, typically groundwater, and there's typically a deep well injection to get rid of the concentrate. One exception is like Brownsville has one of the first brackish groundwater desal plants in the state. They literally put their brine concentrate into a ditch on the back of the property, and they are so close to the Gulf Coast, and that water goes like right into Laguna Madre, which is a hypersaline system, so it's saltier than seawater. So there's an improvement of the water quality there, because the brine concentrate is actually still less salty than the seawater and even the hypersaline Laguna Madre, which it's not to say that putting fresh water in a Laguna Madre is a good thing, but it does receive injections of fresh water. So.
Yeah.
On the seawater side, there's been some controversy in the Corpus Christi area due to proposed disposal of that brine concentrate in the bay and the estuary. So there are folks concerned about that. That's part of the permit battle. I'm not an expert in hydrodynamics in bays and estuaries, thank God, so I don't have to opine on it. What I do know is that if you go offshore, you can have a much simpler permit from Texas Commission on Environmental Quality for disposal. And the thought is you take that water offshore enough where you get some good currents, that quickly dissipates the brine concentrate.
The solution to pollution is dilution.
Dilution,
yeah.
Yes. But there's been a lot of research done on that to show that is safe. Like Australia does that, for example. Israel does some of that, with disposal, say in the Mediterranean. There was recently a environmental review of how the Carlsbad seawater desal plant in California was performing and meeting its environmental obligations, and it was a glowing report. It was meeting all the requirements. So, so these systems can be engineered to minimize or even eliminate the environmental effects.
That's encouraging.
Now, the other thing is the power consumption. It uses a lot of power. Then that ties back to greenhouse gas emissions. So it could be, helping to amplify warming of the climate.
We've talked about this before that, in the past, maybe decade, desalination was seen as really just cost prohibitive. But maybe some of these advances with alternative energy sources are giving us some options.
Right.
You want to say anything more about that?
The newer power generation is tending to come from green sources. That's true in Texas. It's true nationally, and it's true internationally as well. So given that new seawater desalination coming on board is probably going to rely on renewables. So in other words, you can mitigate those impacts, emission impacts, through renewables.
Right.
Some of the discussion going on now in Texas with the potential for billions of dollars going into developing more resilient water supplies for the state, seawater desals, part of that. And then they're talking about those kind of mini nukes to generate the power to help seawater desal. Now, nuclear power has some negatives, I hear.
Yeah, it does. It
But-
does.
But that is emission free
Right.
power. So there's that. And then there's also people that look in the crystal ball of energy that feel like solar plus batteries are going to completely take over. They're going to get cheaper and cheaper with time, such that cost of power is no longer
It's
going to
not
be
the limiting
something.
factor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What other thoughts do you have about the economics around desalination? And
It is expensive, but there are a number of other things that are more expensive. As much as I love rainwater harvesting, it's very expensive to do. I think
To
people should
implement.
do it, but I mean, it's really expensive. Some of the more innovative things that could be done locally are very, very expensive. Now, what's nice about those things is they can be scaled up as appropriate. And where seawater desal, you really need to you go big. Typically, initially, you have those costs. Now, seawater desal can get real expensive once you start tacking pipelines on it. So,
right.
at the coast, even doing it at the coast is expensive. I'm hearing now it's like $4 million a mile now, and the
Wow.
costs are going up. One thing I like to say is one thing that's more expensive than desalinated seawater is no water. If you don't have any water, that is really expensive. The economic cost of not providing water for Dallas-Fort Worth, when you put all the uses in, add up those economic costs and divide it by the shortage of water, it's like $37,000 per acre foot of lost economic value if water isn't provided for them to meet their needs.
Mhm.
Desalination water doesn't come anywhere close to that level of cost. So the value's there. Sometimes people ask about irrigation and seawater desal. That's tough. I looked at the numbers for agriculture in Region O, which is a sizable chunk of the High Plains, greater Lubbock area, $600 an acre foot value. So some folks are very worried about what's going to happen out there, and they're starting to look around for some sources of water. It's not seawater desal unless it's heavily subsidized.
Yeah. And I think, I just want to remind everyone we're talking about desalination. That doesn't mean desalination is the only source of water.
Correct. Correct.
There's a lot of supply that's still available to us through conservation
Yes.
and
yes.
other innovation. But,
Yes.
we're focusing in on this topic
Yeah,
in this tool.
I do think that there are other environmental benefits to seawater desalination, because if there's a choice in Texas between providing water for the people or the environment, who's going to get the water? Carrie, this is your pop quiz.
Yes, history will suggest the people will get the
People will get
water.
the-
Yes.
People will get the water.
Yeah.
So in my thinking, if you care about the environment, you got to take care of the people. If the people aren't taken care of, there's not going to be water for the environment. So we
That's
need
right.
to make sure everybody's needs are met.
Yeah.
Desalination, could be used, in my opinion, to build some real resilience against drought, against climate change amplifying drought, to ensure we have water that we can continue to flow down our rivers into our bays and estuaries and for the environment. We should do conservation. Don't get me wrong. We should do conservation, but like in reuse, things like that.
Yeah.
But the reliability of those water supplies tie back to the original source. So if the original source goes dry, there's
Right.
nothing to conserve. There's nothing to reuse.
Yeah, desal gives it decouples, right? We get
yeah.
decoupled from the weather cycles. We get
Yes.
decoupled from, are we having a drought, which we are, and we may keep having.
Right.
And
right.
models suggest we will. So it is another protection from that variability. And like you said, the predictability of water supply.
Right.
It's a tool in that way.
So, my advice to communities is invest as much as you can in resilience. We don't know exactly what's going to come It's probably going to be bad. So really the question is, we don't know how bad it's going to be.
There's our tagline. We don't know what's going to come, but it's probably bad.
Gonna be bad.
Yes. But come heck or high water.
Come heck or high water. We're going to figure this out.
Yeah, we will be ready. So where can people go to learn more about desalination besides, obviously, this podcast? Keep tuning in because we're going to be bringing it here. But where else can they go?
There is a Texas Desalination Association of folks that are seeking to advance seawater desal in the state. So you can check out their resources, and then pay attention to what's in your water plans. Everybody in Texas is in a regional water plan, so you could ask questions about resilience and ask questions about the possibility of seawater desal.
Great. We'll try to put some links in our show notes, so
that'd be awesome.
Y'all go check us out online. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah,
I learned a lot.
Great
today.
Questions.
Well, thanks.
Well, join us next time where we interview a couple folks from IDE Technologies. This is an Israeli water desalination company and are active in Texas. So we're going to have it'll be a fun conversation to hear about what they've done.
Yeah.
And what they're trying to do in Texas.
Okay. So, front row seat, everybody. Don't miss it.
It's a real deal. Okay.
Thank y'all for joining us. We hope you can take this information with you into your daily life and help spread understanding of climate topics and some of the tools that we have to address these challenges that are coming our way.
This podcast would not be what it is without listeners like you. Be sure to check the show notes for helpful links and resources. We'd like to thank our funders, the Meadows Foundation and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Come Heck or Hot Water is a production of the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment, a research center at Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas. This podcast is produced by our science communications team, made up of Sarah Wingfield and Anna Huff. To learn more about the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment, we'd love for you to visit our website, meadowscenter.txst.edu. I'm Carrie Thompson.
And I'm Robert Mace.
No matter what comes, heck
or hot water,
we'll be here to explore resilient solutions for this changing world.
Thanks for listening.